Okay, hello again. All right, we'd like to continue with our example, our MLS example, defining what a security policy for multi-level security means. You remember, the last time we introduced a rule that constrains read access, right? It was called the simple security property, and it said the following. If I have a subject and an object, I decide whether the subject is allowed read access to the object, by looking at their security levels and asking the question, does the security level of the subject dominate the security level of the object? And if so, I may be granted read access, right? So the question is that all that's needed? If you're thinking in terms of General Eisenhower's office and somebody asking for access to a document laying on the desk, that may be all that's needed. But there are some subtleties which we ought to consider. Okay, so think about the following. The simple security rule codifies what it means to be granted read access. Is that all that's necessary? Well, think about the following scenario. An individual who has top secret clearance, say, walks in, picks up a document marked top secret. He's allowed to read it. He takes that information, writes it on a piece of paper, and sticks that piece of paper into a folder marked unclassified, right? So does that violate simple security? I would claim that it doesn't, because he has read access to the top secret document. He also has read access by simple security to the unclassified document. So that seems to be okay from the perspective of simple security, but it seems grossly bad from a perspective of security, right? So what's missing? Well, I would claim that we also have to worry about write access, because information can flow within a system in two different ways, either by me reading a document I shouldn't, or by me writing information to a place where it shouldn't be, okay? And so in general, in the military context where we're talking about individuals, we don't worry too much about this, because if someone is cleared to top secret, we just assume, or we assure in some way that they don't write information where they shouldn't. We just tell them not to. But this is where computers are different than that scenario. When you introduce computers into the mix, you introduce the following subtlety. Not only are you talking about the clearance of the person sitting in the chair typing on the keyboard, you're also talking about what's happening with all of the programs that person is running. Over the course of a day, you may run dozens or even hundreds of programs. How do you know that those programs are not malicious in some way? They can contain what's called a Trojan horse or spyware, and they may take your confidential information, which you have access to legitimately, and write it down to an unclassified folder somewhere, or send it off on the internet to somebody who shouldn't be allowed to see it. So the difficulty is that even though we trust the person sitting in the chair, we don't trust all the programs running on their behalf which are executing with their privileges. And that's where we need to add an additional rule to constrain where that information flows. And here's the rule that we add. This is called the star property. And what does it say? It says that a subject, which may be a human but may also be a program, attempting to gain write access to an object can only do so if the level of the subject is dominated by the level of the object. What does that mean? It means that I can't write information down. So if I'm top secret, I can't write to an unclassified folder or a secret folder or a confidential folder. If I'm confidential, I can write at my level or above, but I can't write down, okay? And the idea here is to put a mandatory constraint in place to keep information from flowing via the writing mechanism, okay? So why is it called the star property? Well, for the following very deep reason. The guys that first came up with this system of rules couldn't think of a good name for this thing, and so they named it the star property, thinking that they would later go back and do a global substitution of something else for star, and 40 years later we're still stuck with that name. Okay, so one might think the following. Simple security is a very intuitive rule. I shouldn't be able to read information above my level, right? But how about the star property? Well, the star property has some sort of unintuitive consequences if you think about it, right? So for example, let's ask the following question. Can a commanding general who's operating at top secret send an email with marching orders to a foot soldier who's operating at unclassified? Well, not according to the star property, right? Because the star property says I'm not allowed to write down. And even though I may trust the general, I don't necessarily trust the programs operating on his behalf, which may insert top secret information to which he has legitimate access into that email, and it may be compromised in that way, right? So this makes for kind of a difficult situation in some scenarios. So what do? Well, probably what happens is the general logs out of his top secret account, logs in again at an unclassified account, and then sends the information. What did that gain for you? Well, remember, you trust the general, and so you don't believe that he's going to carry information from his top secret persona down to his unclassified persona and inject it into the email. But what you're worried about is a program doing that on his behalf, and this has precluded that. Okay, the second question you might want to ask is, can a corporal or a private or somebody with no clearance overwrite the war plan? Well, surprisingly enough, the answer is there's nothing in this set of rules which precludes that. But remember the proviso that we made in an earlier lecture, that what this set of rules is talking about is confidentiality. And if somebody overwrites the war plan, that's not a violation of confidentiality. That's a violation of integrity. And these rules are not about integrity. If we want to control that, which we certainly do, then we have to put other rules in place, which we'll talk about, several lectures hence. Simple security and the star property are often characterized as read down and write up, or no read up and no write down. And it's important to remember, though, that since this is a partial order, it's not just up and down, it's also sideways that you have to worry about. So if you have two labels which are incompatible, then neither one of those should write information to the other. All right, so what have we discussed in this lecture? Well, we need both information over read and write to control breaches of confidentiality. And we've introduced a new rule called the star property, which uses dominates to decide when a particular subject should be granted write access to a particular object. And it's very important to control write access, not because we don't trust individuals, but because in the world of computers, we don't trust all the programs running on their behalf. And when you run a program, it runs at your permission level, and so has the access that you have. And so those are the reasons why we need this star property to prevent information from flowing down by that program writing maliciously or perhaps accidentally somewhere where it shouldn't. Thank you.